Hello, second grade Smarties, and welcome to Wit and Wisdom Module 2, the American West, Lesson 30. So today, our pizza bite question or our content framing question is, what does a deeper exploration of a comparison between versions reveal in John Henry by Lester? So today, what we are going to do is we are going to be comparing important events that happen in both versions of John Henry. So the first version that we read was John Henry, an American Legend. Now, when we talk about this version, we're going to talk about it by the author. So we will say John Henry by Keats. So Keats' version. And then the second version we read was by Julius Lester. So Lester's version. So when we're comparing, if you hear me talk about Keats' version, that was the first version we read. And Lester's version is the second version that we read. So I want you to think, after listening to both versions of these stories and legends about John Henry, what is something that was similar? What is a feature that was similar in both versions? What is something that you saw was the same in both versions? Tell me in the puzzle. So something that I noticed that was the same in both versions was that John Henry used two hammers. And I also noticed that in both versions, it talks about how he worked on the railroad. So those are examples of two similarities. There were plenty more similarities, but those are the two that stick out in my head the most. In the first version by Keats, the story talked about John Henry's hammers, but in Lester's version, it said that they were sledgehammers. So that was a similarity between the two versions, but in Keats' version, it was just called hammers. And in Lester's version, they were called sledgehammers. That would be an example of a difference. In Keats' version, it was just called hammers. And in Lester's version, it was called sledgehammers. So today, we are going to be doing just that. We are going to be comparing and contrasting the versions that we have read of Lester and Keats' version of John Henry's story. We are going to be doing a writing organizer today. So you will need a piece of paper and a pencil. So go ahead and pause the video to go get your paper and pencil, because we are going to be creating an organizer today to help us get ready for our writing. So just like I said, we are going to be comparing and contrasting. So we will use evidence from both versions to support how those versions were similar, but also how they were different. So we're going to practice comparing and contrasting. Looking at the picture of the dogs, what is something that you see is similar or the same with both dogs? What is something that you see is similar or same? Same as. Tell me in the puzzle, what are two things you see that are the same? Something that I see that is the same is that they both have gray eyes. I also notice that they both have brown fur. What are two things that you notice are different? What is something that is not the same with both dogs? Tell me in the puzzle. So something that I see that is not the same is that this dog, the dog on the right, is shorter than the dog on the left. I also notice that the dog on the right has hair on its head, but the dog on the left does not. So maybe you saw the same things that were different that I saw, or maybe you saw something else. I'll be seeing what you told me in the ed puzzle. So when we are comparing and contrasting, we are specifically going to be talking about contrasting today. We are going to be talking about the differences that we see in these versions. So when we are writing about differences, we use the word but, different, or different. So I would say the dog on the right is short, but the dog on the left is tall. So when we are comparing, we use that conjunction but to compare and contrast two things. So we are going to be comparing and contrasting the time when John Henry was born, when he gets his sledgehammers, when he works on the steam drill, and how he died. So we are going to be looking at the text and the illustrations to find the differences in both versions. So look at the top picture. The top picture is a page from Keats' version, that first version. And I'm going to read the words on this version. And John Henry was born with a hammer in his hand. Bang, 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 rang little John Henry's hammer through the cabin as he crawled about. What's that racket up to now? What's that rascal up to now? His mother chuckled. And before she knew it, he was big enough to help her around the house. So that was Keats' version. Let's listen to the same event. Let's listen to the same. So this is talking about when John Henry gets his hammers. So in the first version, when does John Henry get his hammers? He gets his hammers when he was born, right? So he was born with a hammer in his hand. Let's learn when John Henry gets his hammers in the second version by Leicester. John Henry decided it was time for him to go on down the big road. He went home and told his mama and daddy goodbye. His daddy said, "You got to have something to make your way in the world with, son. These belong to your granddaddy." And he gave him two 20-pound sledgehammers with 4-foot handles made of whalebone. So in this version of John Henry's story, when did John Henry get his hammers? He got his hammers when he left home. And we learned that the hammers were from his granddaddy, his grandfather, right? So those are two differences. In Keats' version, John Henry was born with a hammer in his hand, but in Leicester's version, John Henry gets his hammers from his father before he leaves home. So that's an example of comparing and contrasting the versions in similar events, but the different way that those happen. Also, let's think about the illustrations. In the top illustration, we see that John Henry is a baby. He is a baby with a hammer in his hand. The illustration just shows John Henry in a simple background. But in Leicester's version, we see more details in the illustration. We can see that big boulder. We can see the men working on the road. We can see details in John Henry's hammers. So Keats' version was very simple in its illustrations. It showed us what we needed to see, but Leicester's version had more details in the illustration. So like I said at the beginning of our lesson, we are going to be using an evidence organizer to help us with our writing. So here is what we're going to do. You need to get your piece of paper out, and we are going to create our own organizer with a piece of paper. So the first thing we're going to do is we are going to make a long box at the top. And we are going to write introduction. Like this. So I made a large box at the top, and our introduction sentence is going to go here. We are not going to be doing that just yet. So make a box for your introduction. Pause the video if you need to. All right, the second box is going to be our topic statement. So I'm going to make another long box rectangle shape, and I'm going to say topic statement. So our topic statement is the sentence that comes after our introduction that talks about the differences that is introducing that we are going to be talking about the differences. So topic statement. Pause the video if you need to finish writing that. All right, this is where it gets a little tricky. We're going to make a big rectangle for the second part. And this is where we are going to have to get very specific. All right. Okay, so look at how I have made this box. I have made a rectangle, a large rectangle, and I cut it into 2 equal pieces. Do you see that? I split that box in half. Now, I'm going to I put a line down the side and I have a small line on the top. You see that? All right, and then I'm going to put another line down the middle. And I'm going to write Keats and Lester. And we're going to say point 1 and point 2. Okay, so go ahead and pause the video and make your little chart. So this is where we are going to be talking about the differences that we see in events in the story. So go ahead and pause the video to make this part of your organizer. All right, and the last sentence that we will have in our writing is our conclusion. So we are going to have our conclusion. All right, and there's our conclusion at the bottom. All right, so we are going to be using this organizer to help us find those differences in the text and the illustrations for one event. So we are going to be looking at one event today, and we are going to be talking about the differences that we see in the text for point 1 and the illustration for point 2. So here's an example of an evidence organizer talking about the differences in how John Henry got his hammer. So the introduction says, Keats and Lester both wrote about the legend of John Henry. That would be our introduction. So we are actually going to use that same introduction in our organizer. So go ahead and pause the video, and we are going to write this top sentence. Keats and Lester both wrote about the legend of John Henry. All right, so there is my introduction, and I'm going to use that of John Henry. And we are going to use that introduction for our writing. All right. Our topic statement says there are differences in how John Henry blank. So our sentence starter is going to be, there are differences in blank. We are not going to be writing about how John Henry got his hammer. We're going to be writing about a different event. So all you need to write in your topic statement right now is there are differences in blank. So I'm going to write my topic statement right here. Okay, so there are differences in blank. And I'm even going to draw a line so I know that I need to finish that sentence. All right, so this is what our topic statement is going to look like. There are differences in blank. Go ahead and pause the video if you need to finish writing the sentence starter for your topic statement. All right. Now, the points, our evidence is going to support our topic statement, right? We're talking about the differences in how John Henry got his hammer. Point 1, In Keats' version, John Henry was born with a hammer in his hand, but in Lester's version, his dad gives him 2 hammers when he leaves home. That would be point 1, one sentence. We're comparing Keats and Lester. Point 2, the baby is smiling with his hammer in his hand in the picture, but in Lester's version, John Henry is older and grown up. So we are going to be looking at one event, a similar event in the story, but we are going to use our organizer to find the differences. All right, are you ready? Okay, so we are actually going to compare. We're going to compare when John Henry was born. All right, so we have looked at this top illustration. So let's go ahead and think about the illustrations that we see. So in the top illustration, so I am on point number 2 right here. I'm going to write things that I see in the pictures that are different. So I'm going to write that he is born with a hammer in his hand. And I'm also going to write that he is by himself. Okay, so in point number 2, I wrote that John Henry was born with a hammer in his hand and he is by himself in the illustration. Those are looking at the illustrations. Look at the illustration in Lester's version. What are some things that you see that are different than in Keats' version? So I notice that John Henry is already growing. I also notice his parents and animals are with him. So those are 2 things that are different from the same event. Okay, now let's listen to the text. Let's find some differences between Keats' version and Lester's version in the text. And John Henry was born with a hammer in his hand. Bang, 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 rang little John Henry's hammer through the cabin as he crawled about. What's that rascal up to now? His mother chuckled. And before she knew it, he was big enough to help her around the house. That was Keats' version. Let's read Lester's version. Before long, the mama and papa come out on the porch to show off their brand new baby. The birds oohed and the animals awed at how handsome the baby was. Somewhere in the middle of one of the oohs, or maybe it was one of the backside of the ahs, that baby jumped out of his mama's arms and started growing. He grew and he grew and he grew. He grew until his head and shoulders busted through the roof, which was over the porch. John Henry thought that was the funniest thing in the world. He laughed so loud the sun got scared. It scurried from behind the moon skirts and went to bed, which is where it should have been all the while. All right, so we are going to contrast the day that John Henry was born. So in Keats' version, and what is something that is different that happens in Keats' version than in Lester's version? So I'm going to think out loud for one of them. The first thing in Keats' version that was different was that it said that John Henry was born with a hammer in his hand. That's the first thing that I see that is a big difference between both versions. And it also says that and before she knew it, he was big enough to help her around the house. And we could say that he started helping his mom around the house. So those are two differences. So here's what I want you to do. I want you to pause the video, and in this box by point 1, okay, do you see that? I want you to tell me what are two things that were different in Keats' version. Okay, now let's think about Lester's version. What are two things that you know are different from this version than in Keats' version? So the first thing that I see is that John Henry started growing right away. So he started growing right away. What else is different? What is something else in the text? Ooh, we see that the animals made noises when John Henry was brought outside. So his mama and papa bring him outside. That's something else that was different. So his parents bring him outside. So I'm writing this down too. Bring him outside. Made noises when John Henry came outside. All right. So in that second box on point 1, okay, so I know this is a lot, Smarties. So in this box right here, okay, we're talking about point 1. We said that in Keats' version, he was born with a hammer in his hand, and he started helping his mom around the house. In Lester's version, we said that John started growing right away. His parents brought him outside, and the animals made noises when John Henry came outside. So those are going to be the details that we use to talk about how this part of the story was different than how each version was different than each other. So now let's think about our topic statement. So our topic statement, we started by saying there are differences in blank. In our evidence organizer, what did we compare? We compared the day that John Henry was born. So we could say there are differences in the day John Henry was born. Or maybe your sentence is going to be a little different, but our topic statement has to support our details. So we would say there are differences in the day John Henry was born. There are differences in the way John Henry was born. There are differences in the details of how John Henry was born. But our topic statement needs to talk about our points that we are supporting it with. So we talked about the differences in the day John Henry was born. So we have our introduction, we have our topic statement, we have the point 1 where we talked about differences in the words, and point 2 we talked about the differences in the pictures. Now we need a conclusion. What do you think would be a good conclusion for your writing? Think about it. What would be a good conclusion for your writing? I want you to pause the video and write your conclusion in that last box. So remember, your conclusion is going to be very similar to the topic statement. So go ahead and pause the video and write your conclusion. So I am writing mine right now. All right, so here is my conclusion. I said there are many differences in John Henry's story. So if you are one of my smarties, I want you to take a picture of your completed chart and send it to me in Seesaw. We are going to be using this to help us write our paragraph to answer that question. How are those two versions different? All right, Smarties, and we are going to wrap up with a deep dive. So we talked a little bit about using conjunctions when talking about the differences. We talked about the conjunction but. We use that conjunction when we are talking about differences. But conjunctions are words that connect simple sentences into compound sentences. So look at our options. We have the word and, but, or, and so. We have two simple sentences that we can put together into one sentence. Here's the first simple sentence. In the Keats book, the drill breaks. In the Lester book, the drill does not break. So we need to find the conjunction that fits best. So in the Keats book, the drill breaks. Whoa. And I'm going to hit escape because I'm going to need to use this. All right. In the Keats book, John races against the steam drill. And in the Lester book, John races against the drill. Okay. In the Keats book, John races against the drill. And in the Lester book, John races against the drill. So think about it. Would that one fit? Am I comparing or contrasting? Am I talking about what is the same or what is different? What about but? In the Keats book, John races against the steam drill. But in the Lester book, John races against a drill. No, we're not contrasting those two. So but would not work. In the Keats book, John races against a steam drill. Or in the Lester book, John races against a drill. Does or work? No, because that is when we're talking about options. All right, and our last conjunction is so. In the Keats book, John races against the steam drill. So in the Lester book, John races against a drill. Does so work? No. So which conjunction is going to fit to put these simple sentences together? The word and, right? That is going to be the best option for putting those sentences together. In the Keats book, John races against the steam drill. And in Lester's book, John also races against a drill. So when we are talking about conjunctions, conjunctions are words that put simple sentences together. So we can use these conjunctions and, but, so, or yet to put those sentences together. We will be using conjunctions in our writing tomorrow. So here is what I want you to do. I want you to think of a simple sentence, two simple sentences that you can put together using a conjunction. So you can say in Keats' version, John Henry uses hammers, and in Lester's version, John Henry uses hammers. I put those sentences together with the word and. For the word but, we can say in Keats' version, John Henry worked on a boat, but in Lester's version, John Henry started by working on a road. So I compared the first jobs that John Henry had. So in the Edpuzzle, I want you to use one of these sentence starters to use a conjunction putting sentences together. If you use the word and, you're talking about things that are the same. If you use the word but, you are talking about things that are different. All right, Smarties, that is going to be it for lesson 30. Remember, if you are one of my Smarties, send me a picture of your evidence organizer. I know there weren't a lot of questions that were asked in this lesson, but this was a lesson for us to organize our thoughts for our writing task. All right, Smarties, remember to keep that growth mindset. Good learners do hard things, and I'll see you tomorrow with another lesson about John Henry. Happy learning.